Shalom, everybody. It's Jadiel from the Fourth Dangerous Learning Center, and today's class is going to be on the understanding of whether or not a person can take or participate in Passover if they are not physically circumcised. So there's many people who are not circumcised that desire to serve Yah and follow the Torah. So a lot of times the questions usually arise asking if they are even able to actually take the Passover or participate in the Passover, even participating in the bread and the wine, which represents the Messiah's body and the blood of the covenant, because they are not physically circumcised. So as I was investigating it, I'm going to have a study or a class on circumcision in another video, but this one I'm going to focus just on the question: can a person who is not physically circumcised observe Pesach? So this is where the thing comes from. This is where the instruction comes from. I hope you guys have your scriptures open. I hope you guys have your notebooks and pens and pencils in order to take notes. I think this is very important for us to understand and repair the misunderstanding that's usually promoted out there. So here's the thing. Can you observe Passover if you're not physically circumcised? So this command comes from Exodus chapter 12. So the command in Exodus chapter 12 comes at a time in which they are in Egypt. The Israelites are in Egypt and they are leaving Egypt. And before they leave Egypt, they participate in observing the Pesach or the Passover. And not only observing the Pesach or Passover, but they also engage in eating the Passover as well. So we want to actually make it clear, because there's few words that's not translated correctly, giving off a different understanding as to what is supposed to be understood when they read this. So in Exodus chapter 12, it says here, we're going to start from verse 23. Not from verse 23. It says we're going to start from verse 47. So it says here in Exodus 12, verse 47, it says, all the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to Yah, let all his males be circumcised, then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, because no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and to the stranger that sojourns among you. Thus did all the children of Israel, as Yah commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. And it came to pass the selfsame day that Yah did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies or by their families. So let's go back and see what he's actually saying. So it says here in verse 48, when a sojourner shall sojourn with you, and will keep the Passover to Yah. What does that word keep mean? Now there's two words that's usually interpreted as keep, and this is where the confusion lies. Verse 47, it says here, all the congregation of Israel shall keep it. That word is asah, which means to prepare or to make it. What is he referring to? He's referring to the Passover lamb. It says here in verse 48, and when the stranger shall sojourn with you and will keep it. That word is asah. The Passover, keep the Passover or Pesach to Yah, let all his males be circumcised. This is referring to the actual preparation of the actual lamb. There's a real symbolic importance in the preparation of the lamb, because the lamb itself is a symbol. It's not simply just a meal. It's a literal priestly symbol of a sacrifice, and we're going to look at that as well in this same chapter. So it says if he wants to prepare it, then he needs to come forward, and in order for him to participate in this lamb, it says here in verse 48, when a stranger shall sojourn with you and will prepare the Passover to Yah, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and prepare it, and he shall be as one that is born in the land, because no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. No uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Now, what's the other word for keep that is usually translated when in regards to keeping of the feasts? Another word for keep, and I'm going to see if I can find it in the same chapter, just so that way we can see the difference. Another word for keep is the word shamar. So give me 1 second. The word shamar is the word for keep. It is referred to as guard. It is the same as an observance. We see that keep is also translated from the word kagag, which is to move or to do or to produce or to keep it, like to do it. But I'm specifically looking for shamar. We're gonna look at another verse, another chapter. Okay, let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16. The word observe or keep the month. This is in verse 1. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto Yah, your Elohim. That word observe is shamar, which means to guard, which is the same word used when it says keep the commandments, to shamar it, to guard it, to observe it. And the word keep the Passover in the same verse is asa, which is to prepare it. And it says here in verse 2, you shall therefore sacrifice the Passover. Is he referring to the day? He's not referring to the day. He's referring to the actual animal. The animal is also referred to as Passover, the Passover specifically. So there's a lot of times in which it says keep the Passover and was referring to preparing the lamb, not referring to the observing the day. So this is very important to understand the difference between those two words because it's used so many times. But if you notice here in verse 2, it says, you shall therefore sacrifice the Passover. It says it once again in Deuteronomy 16, verse 5. It says, you may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates, which Yah Elohim gave you. So we're going to look at that word sacrifice. Why did he call it a sacrifice? If it is a sacrifice, that means that it is pertaining to a symbol which points us to Messiah. So in order for the sojourner to participate in eating the Passover lamb, not necessarily observing the Passover, but eating the Passover lamb, they must also be uncircumcised or have the symbol of circumcision. They must also be circumcised, They must also have the symbol of circumcision on their bodies as they partake in the sacrificial system, symbol of the Passover lamb. So let's look at this. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 12. Does it call it a sacrifice? And if it does, why do we now participate in a sacrifice, in eating the sacrifice? Exodus chapter 12, does it call the Passover a sacrifice? Yes, it does. Let's look at verse 26 and 27 of Exodus chapter 12. It says, and it shall come to pass when your children shall say to you, what does it mean by this service? That you shall say, it is the sacrifice of Yah's Passover, who passed over the houses of children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses, and people bowed their heads and worshipped. So the sacrifice of Yah's Passover was fulfilled in Yahushua. He's fulfilled the sacrifice of the Passover. So if he fulfilled the sacrifice of the Passover, we no longer offer up sacrifices. We do not offer up the sacrifices of the Passover because it was fulfilled in Yahushua. And we could see this in harmony with the letter that Paul wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, it says here in verse 7, purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump as you are unleavened. For even the Messiah, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. He's referring to Messiah being the Passover lamb, not the day, the lamb, not the 14th day of the first month. He's referring to him being the actual sacrifice, and that he was that Passover sacrifice for us. Let's see if we can find any more verses that pertain to the sacrifice itself. Let's go to the book of Hebrews, right? So the book of Hebrews speaks about the redemption process as far as the purging of our sins by blood. And it says here in verse 19, it says, when Moshe had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and of goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled the book and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the testament or the covenant which Elohim hath enjoined unto you. Now it says here in verse 22, it says, and almost all things by the Torah was purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood is no remission. And it says in verse 23, it was therefore necessary that the patterns of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices. With better sacrifices. And it says here in verse 24, Messiah is not entered into the holy places or the set apart places made with hands, which are figures of the reality, but into the heaven itself, now to appear before the presence of Elohim for us. And then he says in verse 25, nor yet that he should offer himself often, as the high priest entered into the set apart place every year with the blood of others. This is referring to the Day of Atonement in Leviticus chapter 16. So Hebrews chapter 9 verse 26 says, for then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world, but now once in the end of the world that he hath appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself once. And as it is appointed unto men to die once, and after this the judgment, so Messiah was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. So the sacrifice of the Pesach, you could call the Pesach whatever you want. I know that many people think that the Pesach is a certain type of sacrifice, but we know according to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 that Messiah is the Pesach that was sacrificed for us. And according to Hebrews chapter 9, that this sacrifice was made once and not often, as we see year by year done by the Levitical priests at the temple. So this is a totally different. This is the reality of fulfillment of the sacrifices. Now, with that being said, going back to Exodus, if we now who observe, who shamar, guards the commandment of the Passover, observe it and participate in the bread and the wine, which he tells us to do in a remembrance of him, which he's done on Passover as well, why will we participate in the offering of a sacrifice in order to engage in a sacrificial meal? We do not offer up a sacrifice. The instruction for the sojourner was not that they could not observe the feast or any other feast, because it doesn't give instructions to be circumcised for any other feast. But it says for them to be circumcised in order to participate, to eat the Passover lamb. And the reason being is because the Passover lamb was also a symbolic meal, and therefore you have to represent as a priest the symbolism which points us to the Messiah. And we're going to go, and if you check out our circumcision study, you'll see how circumcision was also a symbolism pointing to the Messiah as well. So we see clearly that it's not that they were unable to observe the Pesach, but that they were unable to participate in the sacrificial Passover lamb that we no longer offer. We no longer offer a sacrificial lamb during Pesach, because the Messiah, according to Hebrews chapter 9, has offered himself once to bring to reality all of the offerings and sacrifices that represent him. And we clearly see in the letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, that the Messiah is our Pesach, is our Passover lamb that was sacrificed for us, that we partake in. This is why he said in the book of John, to eat of my flesh and drink my blood. And this was a terminology used in connection with the Passover lamb. So just as the Passover lamb represents his body, and the blood of the Passover lamb, which went on the two side posts and the top, the lintel, we have the bread, which represents his body, the broken for us, and we have the blood representing his blood of the covenant to ratify the covenant. So I hope that this made this clear, that all those who desire to serve Yah and to observe his feasts, Yah is opening the doors and saying, "Come and observe this feast." When there were symbolic things that we had to do in order to promote the coming of the Messiah, then it was definitely necessary for us to promote those symbolisms, because this is what Yah instructed. But now that the Messiah has brought to reality those offerings, we no longer have to give those offerings. So everything that's involved with participating in those physical offerings are no longer necessary, because their physical offerings are no longer necessary. You understand? So the circumcision was directly connected to eating the Passover, which we no longer offer and eat during the observation of Passover. I hope that this was clear. I hope that this brings light to some of the things that was a little bit confusing, and an encouragement to those who desire to observe these feasts and don't know how to. You can contact us at 4alc.com. Please give us a email, give us questions. We'll be glad to answer these questions in video form. I want to thank you guys for joining our class today, and shalom to you and your homes.